He saw her crying in the rain, all alone, 8 years old, and he did something he hadn't done for many years. He promised her to be her father, just for one day. He didn't expect that day to change everything, forever. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Enjoy watching. It was a late autumn day. A light rain had been falling since morning. Not heavy, but persistent. The entire city had turned gray and wet. The park was deserted. Everyone had run home because of the dampness. The leaves on the trees were yellow and peeling. They lay in wet patches on the paths. The puddles stood dark and still. A black car was parked right at the entrance to the park. It was very clean and expensive. A man was sitting in the car. His name was Minho. He was Korean, with a serious, stern face. He was waiting for someone. He had an important meeting planned. He looked out the car window at the empty alleys. His thoughts were preoccupied with business, but then he noticed something. In the far corner of the park was a playground. There were slides, swings, a sandbox. Everything was bright, but now it was wet and empty. And on the bench next to the smallest slide, there was something sitting, small and colorful. Minho took a closer look. It was a child, all alone, sitting in the rain, motionless. It was strange. Where were the adults? Why was a child alone in this weather? Minho frowned. He put thoughts of his encounter aside. His attention was now focused on this solitary figure. Minho looked at her for a few minutes. No one approached. The child sat motionless. Then the man made out the details. It was a girl, small, about 8 years old. She was wearing a bright blue hooded jacket. The hood was pulled over her head. On her feet were multicolored rubber boots. She sat with her legs tucked under her arms wrapped around her knees. Her head rested on her knees. He realized she was crying. You could tell by her back. Her small shoulders were shaking. She wasn't sobbing loudly. She was crying quietly, like a child's bitterness. She tried to curl up into a ball so as not to be seen. Minho thought it might be a trap, a strange situation, but he quickly looked around. There was no one in the park, no one behind the trees. The windows of the houses across the street were also quiet. Only this girl and the endless autumn rain. Then he thought, none of my business. I have enough of my own worries. He was supposed to be waiting here for an important person. He was supposed to be solving serious issues. This baby crying wasn't his problem. But time passed. The car he was waiting for didn't arrive, and the girl continued to sit and cry. She looked so lonely in the big wet park, such a small and miserable bundle. Minho watched the rain trickle down the hill onto her back. He suddenly felt uneasy at the sight. Something inside him sank, something old and long forgotten. He sighed quietly, then he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The cold air hit him in the face. Fine drops of rain immediately spattered his expensive coat. Minho took his time. He pulled a large black umbrella from the car. He pressed the button, and it opened above his head with a soft rustle. He walked along the wet path toward the playground. He walked slowly, so as not to frighten the girl. His footsteps were audible, the crunch of wet gravel. But the girl heard nothing. She was completely lost in her grief. Minho approached the bench. He stopped 2 steps away. He didn't get too close. Instead, he crouched down slightly to be level with her. He tilted the umbrella so that its large black dome shielded her from the rain, too. "Hey!" he said quietly. His voice was usually stern, but now he made it softer. "Girl?" The girl shuddered. She lifted her head abruptly. A tear-stained face peeked out from under the hood. Large dark eyes full of tears. Her cheeks were wet, her nose red. She looked at him with fear. She was ready to run away. Minho didn't move. He gave her time to realize he wasn't dangerous. "Are you lost?" he asked clearly and slowly. "Looking for your mom." The girl looked at him for a few seconds. Then she shook her head. Her lips trembled. "No," she whispered. Her voice was thin and broken from crying. "Mom's home. I know the way." She lowered her head again, but no longer hid her face. She looked at her boots. The crying had stopped, but she looked very unhappy. She simply waited to see what would happen next. Minho remained where he was. The first question was answered. She wasn't lost. So her tears had something else to do with it. And now, having approached her, he couldn't just walk away. He understood it. He'd involved himself in this situation. Now he could see her pain, and he couldn't pretend he hadn't noticed. He waited silently, giving her time. They sit under the same umbrella. Silence. The only sounds are the sound of rain on the fabric and the occasional car in the distance. The girl is silent. She looks at her hands. Minho doesn't rush her. He simply waits. Then she looks up at him. There's no longer any fear in them, only pain. "There's a school holiday tomorrow," she says quietly. Her voice trembles. "An autumn holiday. There will be competitions, and songs, and a tea party." She falls silent, swallowing the lump in her throat. The teacher said, "You need to come with your mom and dad. It's a family holiday." She says the word family with such bitterness, as if it were a bad thing. Then she lowers her head again. Her shoulders begin to shake again. She tries not to cry, but it doesn't work. "And my parents," she whispers, her voice almost inaudible. "They're not together. They're always fighting." She wipes her face with her sleeve. Her jacket is wet with tears. "See, Mom said, if she comes to the party, then Dad won't come. No way. And if Dad comes, then Mom won't come, on principle." She says that grown-up word again. Fundamentally. And she understands its meaning. Her face distorts with a new wave of grief. That's what they said. As a matter of principle. She covers her face with her hands. Quiet sobs break out again. She's not just sad, she's crushed. Her holiday has been ruined by adult squabbles. She's ashamed. She already sees herself in the classroom, alone, different from everyone else. Minho listens. He stands motionless. He holds the umbrella over them both. His face is serious, but not stern. He looks at this small, hunched bundle of grief. Something changes inside him. Everything he's been doing today, the important meeting, the difficult conversations, the money, the problems, all of it suddenly fades into the distance. It becomes unimportant. Phantom. What he sees is real pain. Not imagined. Not a whim. The simple human pain of a child. The pain of injustice. The pain of your world being split in two, and you can't glue it back together. The girl begins to speak again, through tears. She speaks not to him, but into space. "I don't want everyone to watch," she whispers. Her voice breaks. "I want all my friends. Sasha, Lisa. I want them to be with Mom and Dad, all together. They'll laugh. And She falls silent. Then she exhales the most terrible thing. "And I'll be alone, or just with my mom. And everyone will think that something's wrong with me, that my family is broken." The word broken hangs in the air, heavy, sharp. It grates on the ear. Minho looks at her tear-slicked face, at her fingers clutching her knees. He sees more than just sadness. He sees shame. Deep, childish shame. Shame for being different. Shame for not having a whole home. Shame for being pitied or laughed at. This pain seems more important to him than anything in the world right now. More important than his adult games and complex plans. This is pure, unprotected human pain, and it demands action. You can't simply walk away. You can't say, "It's none of my business." He remembers something, long ago, his own. Different eyes, filled with similar pain. He quickly pushes these thoughts away, but the feeling remains. The feeling that something needs to be done. Now. The thought comes immediately, completely, without hesitation, without much thought. It is simple and clear. We need to remove the cause of these tears. We need to give her what she wants, at least for one day, at least for appearances. Minho doesn't think about how it looks. He doesn't think about the questions that will follow. He sees the problem and sees a straightforward solution, like a math problem. He takes a deep breath, then he speaks, firmly, clearly, so there is no doubt. "Okay, I'll solve this problem." The girl's head snaps up. Her eyes are wide open. The tears on her eyelashes freeze. She looks at him, not understanding. She even stops breathing. Her brain can't process these words. "Huh? How?" she breathes, just one word. It contains both hope and disbelief. Experience has taught her. Adults often say things and don't do them. Minho looks her straight in the eyes. His usually calm eyes take on a look of determination, almost a challenge. "I'll be your dad for this holiday," he says simply, without a smile, but also without sternness, as a statement of fact. "Just for one day, tomorrow, at your school." The air under the umbrella seems thick. The girl blinks. Once, twice. She tries to understand. A stranger, in a formal coat, offering to be her dad for a day. But, she begins, flustered. You're not my dad. No, he agrees calmly. But tomorrow I will be, for everyone watching. Will that be enough? He doesn't ask if she wants this. He sees something change in her eyes. The light returns, at first timid, unbelieving, then brighter. This is no longer just hope. This is an adventure. This is salvation from shame. Her lips tremble, but not from tears anymore. She nods slowly. Just once. But it is enough. Minho nods in response. It's decided. The thought seems sudden to him, like a flash of lightning in a gray sky. But strangely, it also feels like the only right thing. He hadn't planned this. 10 minutes ago, he was thinking of something else, and now he's asking a little stranger to be her father for a day. Madness. But when he looks into her eyes, in which tears gradually give way to a bewildered glint, he understands there is no other way. He can't leave this pain unanswered. He slowly straightens up, but continues to hold the umbrella over them. The rain beats against the silk a little more insistently. My name is Minho, he says, introducing himself formally, as if at a business meeting. But his voice is still soft. What's yours? The girl looks at him, assessing him. She wipes the last tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving dirty streaks. Amy, she answers quietly. The name comes out tightly, as if she's deciding on something important. Ami, he repeats, and the name sounds a little different on his tongue, firmer. Nice to meet you. She nods, still in disbelief. A struggle crosses her face. The grief recedes, but in its place comes not laughter, but wary hope, mixed with disbelief. She looks at his hands, at the expensive watch, at the impeccable cut of his coat. This man is not from her world. He is not like her friends' dads, with their stretched-out sweaters and laughter. He is serious, very serious, but he has just proposed the impossible. And in this impossible, there is a crack through which a weak ray of salvation shines. Are you really coming? She blurts out. The question is filled with a childish fear that this is a joke, a mirage that will disappear as soon as she believes it. Minho doesn't smile. He knows a careless smile would ruin everything now. He nods once, briefly and clearly. If your mother allows it. Yes. He says this with the same unshakable certainty with which one speaks of the laws of nature. The sun rises in the east, water is wet. He will come to the party if his mother allows it. There is power in this certainty. Ami feels it. She takes a small, almost imperceptible breath, and her shoulders, always tense, sag slightly, relax. But we need to ask your mom's permission, Minho continues, returning to practical matters. He looks at the wet area, at the darkening sky. Now, take me to your home. Amy looks at him, then at her house, visible in the distance through the trees. She hesitates. Bring a stranger home? The safety rules she'd been taught since childhood come flooding back. But those rules didn't take into account this man. The man who stopped in the rain and offered to be her dad. There's nothing bad in his eyes. Only determination. She slowly gets up from the bench. Her legs are numb from sitting in an uncomfortable position for so long. Okay, she says, and it sounds more like an agreement, a conspiracy. Let's go. He waits for her to shake herself off and adjust her hood. Then he takes a step, and they begin walking. He doesn't take her hand, but holds the umbrella so that it completely covers her small figure. He himself is partially outside, and the rain quickly silvers the shoulder of his coat. They walk in silence. Ami steals glances at him. He walks slowly, matching her short stride. His boots confidently step through the puddles, hers splashing beside them. She doesn't know what to say. Should she ask who he is? Why would he do this? But the questions seem too big and awkward. She's afraid that if she asks, the magic will crumble. Minho is silent too. His thoughts are already racing ahead of their leisurely pace. He'll need to explain himself to his mother, quickly, clearly, without emotion. Convince her. He's already constructing arguments in his head, discarding the weak ones, leaving only ironclad logic. The girl cried, the problem is solvable. There are no risks. The benefits are obvious. He's used to solving complex problems. This one is unusual, but not difficult. They exit the park and cross a quiet street. Ami points to a 9-story panel building, one of many in the area. Right there, she says, and uncertainty creeps into her voice again. What if Mom says no? What if she gets angry? Minho just glances at the house, assessing it like he would any new place. Lead the way, he says simply. They enter the building. It's clean but shabby. It smells of damp mops and food from the apartments. Ami presses the elevator button. They stand in the elevator in silence, watching the changing numbers of the floors. At the 7th floor, she gets off and walks down a long corridor with identical doors. She stops at one of them. She takes a key from her jacket pocket on a bright yellow duckling keychain. Her fingers tremble slightly. The key creaks into the lock and clicks. Amy pushes the door. Mom! I'm home! She shouts, entering the hallway. Her voice is louder and higher than usual, with tension in it. Minho hears footsteps from the depths of the apartment. Slow, tired. He stands at the threshold, not stepping inside, allowing the others to assess the situation from within. A woman emerges from the kitchen. It's Kayla. She looks exhausted. She's wearing casual pants and an oversized t-shirt. Her hair is pulled back into a loose ponytail. There are stains of detergent on her hands. She wipes them on a towel, and the smile that had begun to form on her face at the sight of her daughter fades and slowly slips away. Her gaze slid from Amy to the tall, dark figure in the doorway, to the expensive, impeccably tailored coat, to the face of the unfamiliar Asian man who looked at her with a calm, unblinking gaze. Everything about him, from his posture to his quiet confidence, screamed of another world, of money, of power, of things that had nothing to do with her small, well-ordered, albeit difficult life. Anxiety instantly grips her face. She takes an involuntary step forward, as if to stand between her daughter and the stranger. The towel in her hands freezes. Ami? She says, a silent question in her voice. Who is this? What's going on? The girl freezes, clutching her yellow keychain. Minho senses the tension hanging in the air in the hallway. He takes a small, almost polite step forward, but remains within the doorway, not intruding further without invitation. His face is inscrutable, but there's no threat in it, only a willingness to talk. The hardest part begins now. The silence in the small hallway becomes thick, almost palpable. Kayla stands rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the stranger. The weariness on her face is replaced by wariness and a question bordering on fear. Ami, who is this? She asks, her voice harsher than she perhaps intended. The anxiety is palpable. She extends her hand, and Amy instinctively takes a step toward her, but instead of hiding behind her, she remains in the middle, like a link between two worlds. Minho understands the gesture. He doesn't make any sudden movements. Instead, he bows gently, almost ceremoniously, shallow but respectful. The gesture is at once alien and polite, emphasizing his distance and the seriousness of his intentions. Good afternoon, he says in a calm, even voice that somehow drowns out the sound of the rain outside. My name is Minho. I apologize for disturbing you without warning. He pauses briefly, letting her take the name in. His gaze is direct, open, but not intrusive. I'd like to discuss Amy's school party tomorrow with you, he continues, his words sounding as casual as if he were suggesting a discussion of the parent-teacher conference schedule. Kayla blinks, trying to process this information. Her gaze darts from his impassive face to her daughter's shining eyes, who stares at him as if he's a magician. Holiday? She repeats silently. What does this man, clearly not from their circle, have to do with her daughter's school celebration? Concern gives way to utter bewilderment. Amy can't stand the tension. The emotions she'd been holding back the entire journey home burst forth in a cascade of words. Mom, he's going to be my dad, she blurts out, jumping up and down with anticipation. He saw me crying in the park and came over, and I told him about the party and how you and Dad weren't coming together, and he said he'd solve the problem. He'll be my dad at the party, so I can have a complete family too. He promised! She speaks without taking a breath, the words tumbling over each other. Her small face glows with such pure, unbridled hope that Kayla momentarily catches her breath. These words contain all the pain of the last few days, all her own attempts at consolation, shattered by the iron logic of childhood grief. Everyone else will have it, but I can't. And now this pain has found an incredible, fantastical solution in the person of this enigmatic Minho. Kayla glances between her daughter, whose eyes glow like two embers, and this strange man. He listens to Amy without interrupting, his face calm. He doesn't try to smooth things over with a smile, doesn't look embarrassed. He simply stands there, confirming every word the girl says with his silence. This seriousness, this absolute certainty in his words, is even more disconcerting than if he had started apologizing or joking. Kayla's mind refuses to piece the picture together. Fragments of thoughts race through her head, colliding and finding no resolution. How did he know? Why did he need it? Who is he? What does he want? Standard maternal instincts scream at her, warning her not to let strangers into her life, especially her child's. But there was nothing standard about this situation. A wave of doubt, cold and sticky, washes over her. Could this be some kind of elaborate scam? But what can you expect from a single mother and her daughter in a Khrushchev-era prefab apartment? Maybe he's mentally ill, but his behavior, his speech, his appearance, everything screamed of strict self-control and control, not madness. Could it have something to do with her ex-husband? The thought makes her insides turn cold, but she immediately dismisses it. It would be too complicated and pointless. She sees Amy looking at her, and there's a plea in that look. Not a capricious one, but a desperate one. Please, Mom, believe me. Please, let me. Kayla feels the ground slipping from under her. All her adult arguments, all her reasonable reasons for caution, are shattered by this childish gaze and the stranger's stony composure. She opens her mouth to say no, to ask a dozen sharp questions, to send this man packing. But the words won't come. I don't, she begins, her voice hoarse and alien. I don't understand. That's all she can muster. Complete confusion. She looks at Minho, waiting for an explanation that will somehow fit into her understanding of the world. An explanation that, she vaguely senses, won't come. Minho doesn't move from the threshold. He sees a storm on the woman's face. Fear, mistrust, confusion. He's familiar with this cocktail of emotions, though he usually sees it in the eyes of men during negotiations, not in the eyes of a tired mother in a cramped hallway. He understands that what's needed now is absolute clarity and no pressure. He begins to speak slowly, choosing simple, unassailable words. His voice doesn't rise, and there's no request or demand in it. It's simply a statement of facts, arranged in a flawless, logical chain. I saw your daughter crying in the park, he says, his gaze briefly flicking to Amy, who pauses, listening. She was alone. I asked her what was wrong. She explained the situation with the holiday. He pauses briefly, letting Kayla realize. He wasn't interrogating, he wasn't searching. He was simply witnessing. The problem is simple and solvable, he continues, a hint of businesslike efficiency creeping into his tone. She needs someone to play the role of her father for a few hours. I can play him. It's one role for one day. He boils down this entire emotional, painful story to a simple thesis, as if it weren't about replacing a father, but rather a temporary job. He even uses the word role, emphasizing the temporary and conditional nature of the undertaking. That's all? Kayla blurts out, her voice still tinged with disbelief. Just like that? Out of the kindness of her heart? Minho tilts his head slightly, as if considering the term, kindness of heart. It's an unfamiliar concept to him. For her smile, he corrects, and there's no sentimentality in his words. It's more of an end goal, clear and measurable. He says it as simply and matter-of-factly as if he were offering to help carry heavy bags into the apartment. His logic leaves no room for hidden motives or complex schemes. There's a task, the girl's tears, and there's a straightforward, albeit unconventional, solution, him. That's all. This simple, almost childish directness affects Kayla more powerfully than any vows or assurances. There's no pathos in it, and therefore no lie. Or is it a brilliant disguise? She looks at him again, trying to find a catch in his calm eyes, but she finds only confidence and a willingness to either enter or turn and leave, as she chooses. Kayla looks away from Minho and at Amy, and in that moment, all her doubts and fears collide with reality in her daughter's face. She sees more than just hope. She sees desperate, greedy faith. The same faith that faded with every scandal, with every time she was forced to choose between her parents. Ami looks at her, breathless, her small fists clenched at her chest. Her eyes hold a whole world. Fear of rejection, pleading, and an almost palpable joy that tomorrow she will be like everyone else. Kayla feels something inside her give way. All her arguments. What will people say? How does it look? What if something happens? Suddenly seem petty and selfish against the backdrop of this childish happiness. She's tired. Tired of wars, of explanations, of not being able to give her daughter simple, normal joy. And then this strange, impossible chance falls from the sky in the form of a serious Korean man in an expensive coat. She closes her eyes for a second, takes a deep, tired breath. When she opens them, there's no longer any struggle in them. There's acceptance, mixed with the remnants of anxiety. The main thing is that Ami is happy, she says quietly, and the words sound like surrender, but also like relief. She looks at Minho. Just for this holiday, and I have to be there. Nearby. This is her final condition. She will not let her daughter go with him alone. He nods understandingly, as if it were a given. Of course, he says. That makes sense. Amy can't help but let out a quiet, happy squeal, jumping up and down. Kayla can't help but smile faintly as she looks at her. Her fears haven't gone away, but they've faded into the background in the face of this sudden, childish joy. You must be uncomfortable standing in the doorway, Kayla says, finally coming to her senses. Come in. I'll put the kettle on. Minho bows his head in gratitude, carefully folds his wet umbrella, and taking off his shoes, stands on the nearby rug in his socks. He shows no interest in exploring the apartment, his gaze calm and neutral. They enter the small but cozy living room, which opens onto the kitchen. While Kayla fusses over the stove, Minho sits on the edge of the sofa, which Ami immediately points out as the best spot, and then begins what he apparently considers necessary preparation. Tell me about school, Amy, he says, his tone changing. He doesn't baby her, but speaks a little slower, more clearly, addressing her as an equal participant in the project. What's your teacher's name? Layla, Amy quickly answers, sitting down on the stool opposite. Layla, Minho repeats. Memorizing. Who's your best friend? Lisa. And Sasha. Amy begins talking animatedly about her friends, her classes, and everyone's favorite things. Minho listens attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What's Lisa's last name? What floor is your class on? What's your favorite subject? He doesn't interrupt, just nods, taking in the information. He's mentally mapping out her school life, so as not to miss a beat tomorrow. Kayla watches them out of the corner of her eye as she makes tea. She sees how her daughter, usually shy with strangers, blossoms under his attention. He doesn't try to cheer her up or make funny faces. He treats her with respect, like a small business partner. And Ami, sensing this, responds with the same seriousness, trying to give the most accurate answers. Once the tea is poured into mugs, Minho asks the most important question. Ami, he says, sipping some hot tea. What does your father usually call you? Amishka? Daughter? Something else? The question hangs in the air. Kayla freezes, saucer in hand. Amy is taken aback for a second, her gaze dimming. He almost never called me, she says quietly. Just Amy. Minho nods, accepting this information without comment. Then I'll just call you Ami too, he concludes. It'll be more natural. He doesn't try to feign a non-existent tenderness. He builds the role on what is, on the truth. And there's something soothing in this strange, businesslike honesty. Kayla exhales slowly. She still doesn't understand who he is and why all this is happening. But watching this rehearsal, she realizes with a vague surprise that he approaches his role with more responsibility than her real ex-husband approached his role as a father. The tea is finished, the mugs empty. Minho places his on the saucer with a soft, barely audible clink. He looks at Amy, and the same businesslike seriousness with which he conducted the entire rehearsal appears in his gaze. Now it's time to draw boundaries. Ami, he says, and the girl immediately sits up straight on her stool, realizing something important is about to happen. There are rules. We need to discuss them. Kayla, washing mugs at the sink, slows down, listening. At the party, Minho continues clearly, I'll be your father. You can call me Dad to the others. I'll be there. But this is only a game for the duration of the party. Do you understand? Amy nods, her face becoming focused. She hangs on every word. Once the party's over, the game's over. He pauses briefly to let it sink in. The rest of the time, always, you listen to your mother. Only her. I'm temporary. She's real. That's rule number 1. He looks at Kayla, as if conveying her confirmation of her dominance. Kayla feels awkwardly grateful for the gesture. He's not trying to usurp her place, even in theory. And secondly, Minho returns his gaze to Amy. This is a secret between us. Not a real secret, but a special project. We don't discuss the details with others. Not with friends, not at school. You just say, "This is my dad," that's all. Can you do it? Amy thinks for a second, then nods again, more confidently. She likes the idea of a secret project. It makes everything even more important and meaningful. I can do it, she says solemnly. Okay. Minho rises from the couch. He extends his hand to her, not to pat her head, but as one adult to another. Then we have a deal. Amy places her small hand in his with a serious expression, his big one. They shake hands. The deal is done. In her eyes, there is not childish delight, but a sense of responsibility. She has become part of something grown-up and serious. I'll be there tomorrow at 9, he says, now addressing Kayla. If anything changes, here's my number. He takes a discreet business card holder from his inside coat pocket, takes out a single card, and places it on the edge of the table. It says only a name, Minho, and a cell phone number. No title, no company, just a contact. Kayla nods without looking at the card. She still can't believe this is happening. After seeing him to the door, she and Amy watch in silence. As his dark figure disappears into the elevator, the door closes. Silence reigns in the apartment, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Mom, Amy whispers, her eyes still shining. Is it true? It's true, Kayla answers quietly, hugging her. She doesn't know what true is, but it's impossible to deny the reality of what happened. The next morning was surprisingly clear. The autumn sun broke through the scattered clouds, and the rain washed away all the gray. Amy woke before her alarm. Her most beautiful dress, blue with a white collar, was already waiting on the chair. She twirled in front of the mirror, while Kayla braided her hair into tight pigtails with bows. Sit still, the mother gently chided, but she was no less worried. She kept glancing at her watch. 9 in the morning. The condition. At precisely 9 o'clock, a short, polite beep sounded over the intercom. Not insistent, not long, just long enough to announce his arrival. Kayla let him in. Minho walked in. He was dressed differently than yesterday. He wore dark, well-fitting trousers, an expensive, fine wool sweater, and a light leather jacket. No formal coat, no formal suit. He looked like a very wealthy, detail-oriented man, perhaps a father out for the weekend. He was less boss and more man, but that didn't make his presence any less imposing. In his hands, he held a small, elegant box. Good morning, he said, nodding to Kayla. Then his gaze fell on Amy, frozen in the hallway in her dress. He looked her over appraisingly from head to toe. You look very dressed up, for an important occasion. Amy blushed with pleasure and embarrassment. Minho handed her the box. This is for you, for good luck. The box contained a discreet, elegant silver bracelet with a small ball pendant. No gemstones, nothing fancy. Simply a beautiful, high-quality item. A gift a father might give for a first-year school holiday. Amy gasped, hesitating to take it. She looked at her mother. Kayla nodded, surprised. Thank you. The girl put the bracelet on, and it glittered on her wrist. You're welcome. Minho turned to Kayla again. Are you ready? He seemed to be in complete control of time and the situation. Amy was jumping impatiently at the door, unable to hide her excitement. Kayla, picking up her bag and keys, felt like a passenger on a ship steered by a confident captain. Her doubts hadn't gone away, but now they were driven deep inside, crushed by this strange, undeniable reality. The school hall buzzed with voices and laughter. It was decorated with paper garlands, leaves, and pumpkins. Children in their best clothes scurried about, and parents huddled in small groups, chatting. The air smelled of vanilla, apple juice, and baby perfume. As the three of them entered, several heads involuntarily turned their way. Minho caught their attention first, his unfamiliar appearance, his otherworldly, calm confidence. Then their gazes slid to a beaming Amy holding his hand, and to Kayla, who walked beside him, trying to appear unaffected. A murmur, almost palpable, ran through the small group of parents from Amy's class. People exchanged glances and whispered, "Who's this? Does Amy have—" "I've never seen." The looks were varied, surprised, curious, appraising. For many, Kayla was that single mom, and her personal life was the subject of quiet gossip. The appearance of a man, and such a man at that, broke all the mold. Amy didn't seem to notice the whispers. She was beaming. She walked with her head held high, clutching Minho's hand tightly. Her fingers dug into his large, calm ones. She wasn't just guiding him, she was demonstrating. "Look! There he is, my dad." Minho ignored the stares. He walked calmly, his gaze sweeping across the room, assessing the surroundings, just as he had done in the park. He spotted the teacher, a woman with a kind but tired face, and walked gently toward her, guiding Amy along. Kayla followed slightly behind, her cheeks burning. "Layla?" Minho addressed the teacher, his voice low and polite, briefly drowning out the hubbub around him. "Good afternoon. I'm Amy's father, Minho," and he said it so naturally, as if he introduced himself like that every month. The teacher, slightly taken aback, quickly collected herself and smiled. "Nice to meet you. We finally met." Amy was so prepared for the party. "Yes," Minho agreed, his gaze briefly falling on the girl who was looking up at him, holding her breath. "We've all been waiting for this day." The "we" sounded so natural that Kayla's heart sank. She saw the teacher's gaze soften, and some of the parents look away slightly upon hearing it. The whispers didn't stop, but their tone changed. From amused and malicious, it became more interested and respectful, simply because the man holding Amy's hand exuded such an undeniable right to be there, to be her father at this moment. Amy, still holding his hand, looked around the room. She saw Lisa with her mom and dad, Sasha with both of her parents, and now she had a dad too, a real, handsome, strong one. Even if only for today. But today, he was here, and she proudly squeezed his hand, no longer feeling inferior. The celebration was gaining momentum. After tea and a circle dance, Layla announced the start of the games. First up was a fun relay race for fathers and children. "Dads, come to the center of the room," the teacher called loudly, and a group of men of varying ages and sizes began to move forward, smiling and joking. Minho watched this movement calmly. Ami tugged at his hand, her eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, let's go," she breathed. And these words, spoken aloud for the first time and with purpose, sounded a little hesitant, but full of hope. Minho nodded. He unzipped and removed his leather jacket, carefully folding it over the back of the chair next to Kayla. Underneath, he wore the same dark sweater. He looked composed, without any excess muscle, but with that athletic tautness that spoke of discipline. He didn't join in the general merriment of the fathers, nor did he clap the others on the shoulders. He simply walked to the designated spot, holding Amy's hand, and stood at the starting line, awaiting instructions. Ami settled down next to him, her small palm sweaty with excitement in his dry, cool one. She looked up at him, her face filled with unconditional trust. He can do anything, her gaze shone. Even if the competition is the most difficult in the world. The rules were simple. A father with a child on his back had to run to a chair at the other end of the room, run around it, and return. Minho assessed the distance, the floor surface, and the distance to the other participants. He knelt down in front of Amy. "Get on," he said simply. No more playing around with the flying plane part. She climbed onto his back, careful not to wrinkle her dress, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He rose easily, without any visible effort, as if she weighed no more than his jacket. Amy laughed in surprise and delight. Layla gave the signal. The hall erupted in shouts and laughter. Fathers, some amused, others straining, rushed forward with their squealing children on their backs. Minho's pace didn't leap, but rather a powerful, steady acceleration. He wasn't the fastest, but he ran with skill and control, his steps precise, his balance perfect. Ami, clinging to his back, screamed with delight. There was a slight jostling around the chair as they turned. One of the fathers, a large, flushed man, turned too abruptly with his plump son and, losing his balance, swung his elbow awkwardly. The elbow caught Minho in the side, not hard, but noticeable, forcing him to take an extra step to the side to steady Amy. It all happened in a split second. but it was enough. Minho stopped, not abruptly, but smoothly, placing a foot for balance. He turned his head toward that father, and in that moment, his face changed. All the softness, all the playful engagement vanished without a trace. His gaze became completely flat, cold and heavy as lead. He didn't frown, didn't wince. He simply looked, and in that gaze there was no anger or resentment, only a bottomless, icy emptiness, measuring the distance, assessing the threat, and calculating the response. That gaze held that very silence that comes before the storm. His father, who had just begun to apologize with a drunken smile, froze, and the smile slid from his face. He felt that gaze physically, like a sudden chill down his spine. Several parents nearby also fell silent, instinctively sensing the change in the atmosphere. Even Ami, perched on his back, quieted down, sensing something strange but serious. It lasted 2-3 seconds at most. Then Minho slowly, very slowly looked away. He didn't say a word. With just one hand, still holding Amy, he adjusted the sleeve of his sweater where it might have slipped from the jolt. The movement was measured, almost ceremonial. He turned back to face the race. And, as if nothing had happened, he continued running with the same even, powerful stride. The tension melted as quickly as it had arisen. Shouts and laughter filled the hall again, but an awkward silence fell over the group of parents who had witnessed the episode for several minutes. The father was no longer laughing, but running with concentration and precision toward the finish line. Everyone understood one thing. It was best not to touch this man. As if the little incident had never happened, Minho finished the race powerfully. His final strides were swift, and he crossed the imaginary finish line half a length ahead of his closest pursuer. Amy slid off his back, her face flushed with excitement. She jumped up and down, unable to contain her emotions. "We're first! We're first!" she screamed, grabbing his hand and shaking it. Minho, standing upright and breathing evenly from his run, looked at her. The ice in his eyes had melted, giving way to the same calm, attentive expression. He wasn't smiling broadly, but the corners of his lips twitched in something vaguely resembling approval. He placed his hand on her head, a brief, reserved gesture. "You ran well," he said, and it sounded like the highest praise. Layla, beaming, approached them with a small box. It contained gilded cardboard medals on ribbons. "Well done! True champions!" The teacher placed the medal around Amy's neck. The shiny circle shone against her blue dress. Amy clutched it in her palm, examining it as if it were real gold. She had never been so happy in her life. This wasn't just winning a game. It was a victory over shame, over loneliness, over feelings of inferiority. In that moment, she wasn't just Amy, the girl from a broken home. She was Amy, the daughter of a champion, and the whole room saw it. Kayla, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but smile widely and genuinely. She saw that strange, chilling gaze on Minho, and her insides twisted with the old, familiar fear of the unpredictability of male power. But then she saw how that gaze softened when he looked at her daughter, how he simply adjusted his sleeve and ran on without causing a scene, how Amy now beamed, holding her medal, and he stood beside her, a calm and reliable pillar. And Kayla's smile wasn't just for her daughter. It was for herself, too. For this crazy, impossible day that, against all expectations, turned out to be not a nightmare, but a miracle. Maybe only briefly. But now, in this room, to the sound of children's laughter and with a gold medal around her daughter's neck, it was all she needed. After the competitions and games, tea began. Long tables, pushed together, were laden with treats, homemade pies, cookies, fruit, and, in the center, a huge cake decorated with creamy autumn leaves. The children, excited and hungry, sat down with their parents. The overall atmosphere became more informal, noisy, and homely. Minho, Ami, and Kayla took seats nearby. Ami, without missing a beat, immediately reached for a piece of cake. Minho, watching her impulsive movements, silently transferred a neater, unbroken piece with a rosette of cream onto her plate. Ami looked at it in surprise, then at the cake, and, concentrating, began to carefully eat with a fork like an adult. He seemed to continue his work, even at the table, gently guiding and correcting her behavior to fit the image of a well-behaved child from a good family. Kayla, sitting across from her, caught these small details. He didn't lecture or reprimand her, He simply set a certain standard by his example and silent expectation. And Amy, wanting to please him, unconsciously adjusted, trying her best. When cake frosting landed on Amy's cheek, Minho didn't point it out. Without another word, he pulled a neat, folded dark handkerchief, not a paper napkin, from his pocket, and turning to her, wiped the stain with a light, precise motion. The movement was quick and businesslike, as if he were adjusting his tie, but there was no irritation in it. Amy paused for a second, allowing him to do so, and then smiled brightly. To anyone looking at them at that moment, it was an idyllic picture. A beautiful, well-kept family, an attentive, slightly stern, but clearly caring father. A happy, radiant daughter, a mother, calmly watching them with a gentle smile. They looked whole, harmonious, like that complete family Amy had dreamed of. The illusion was so perfect that even Kayla allowed herself to believe it for a moment, feeling a strange, warm peace she hadn't known in a long time. The idyll was broken by Layla's friendly but curious approach. The teacher, making her way around the guests with a teapot, stopped next to their seat, her gaze warmly gliding over Amy, beaming with a medal around her neck. "Well, Amy, congratulations on your win," she said, then turned to Minho. "And you too. You did great. I'm so happy to finally meet Amy's father." Her intonation was absolutely sincere, but there was a slight bewilderment in it, common to everyone. Where had he disappeared to before? "Thank you," Minho nodded politely, putting down his cup. "You must be a very busy person," Layla continued, pouring tea for Kayla. "Do you often work abroad? Amy once mentioned that you're rarely home." The question hung in the air, light but direct. Kayla tensed inwardly. Ami froze, fork in hand. This question was a trap for their fragile legend. Minho didn't blink. A small, polite, social smile appeared on his lips. The kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, but was perfect for situations like these. He looked slightly regretful, like a businessman acknowledging a flaw. "Yes, unfortunately, business often requires me to be in other cities," he said smoothly, without specifying where or what exactly. His tone was both apologetic and suggestive of the inevitability of such a life. "Work chic takes up a lot of time, Ian. But..." He paused briefly and turned his head toward Amy, and at that moment his gaze seemed to soften a degree. "All meetings are canceled today. Only for my daughter." He said this with such a light yet convincing tone of self-sacrifice that Layla was immediately moved. Her expression expressed understanding and sympathy for the workaholic father, who still found time for the school celebration. That's right. She nodded approvingly. "Children grow up so fast. Amy, appreciate your dad. He made time for you." Amy nodded, serious and solemn. She felt part of this noble justification. Kayla, listening to this flawless, effortless deception, felt a mixture of relief and a strange bitterness. He was protecting them. He was fitting them into a normal, understandable story, one without scandalous divorces, just a busy father. And he did it so flawlessly that it was frightening. The celebration was drawing to a close. The children were tired, their excitement giving way to sleepy exhaustion. The parents began to pack. Ami, removing her gold medal to carefully place it in its box, looked both happy and pensive. The magic of the day faded before their eyes, along with the emptying hall. They stood in the school hallway, putting on their coats. Kayla was helping Amy zip up her jacket. Minho was already ready, his leather jacket back in place, his face returning to its usual, neutral, closed expression. Amy looked at him. Her radiance faded, replaced by understanding. She approached him, not holding his hand, but simply standing very close. Then she hugged him, not briskly, as in a burst of joy after a victory, but quietly, tightly, pressing her cheek against his sweater like a child. She hugged him as tightly as her small hands could, as if trying to hold on to the passing day. She raised her head, and standing on tiptoe, whispered right in his ear, so quietly that probably only he heard. "Thank you, Dad." The word daddy in that whisper no longer sounded like a role or a title. It sounded like gratitude for the gift of a miracle, for saving her from shame. For that one, perfect day when everything was like everyone else's. And even better. Minho froze slightly. His body, usually so collected and ready to move, froze for a moment. He hadn't expected such a direct, emotional gesture. He wasn't prepared for it. His arms, hanging at his sides, tensed for a second, as if hesitant. Then, very slowly, he raised one hand. Not to hug her back. That would have been too much. That would have violated the boundaries of their agreement. He simply placed his broad palm on her head, over her neat braids with bows. And gently, almost weightlessly, he patted her head. Once. The gesture was restrained, detached, but in it, in that momentary pause and that light touch, there was some strange, elusive recognition, an acknowledgement that the performance was over, but its echoes lingered. "It's okay, Amy," he said quietly, and that was all he could find it in himself to say. Then he gently extricated himself from her embrace, not pushing, but simply taking a step back, restoring his distance. His face became inscrutable again. The role had been played to the end. The course for the exit had been set, but the echo of that childish whisper still hung in the air, impossible to erase. Minho's car. The silence inside was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Ami sat in the back next to her mother, clutching the box containing her medal. Her face, so recently radiant, was now thoughtful. She looked out the window at the passing city lights, but her gaze was absent. The joy, so bright and all-consuming in the hall, was now slowly settling like dust after a fireworks display, revealing the naked truth. The party was over, and with it, the game. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day. School, where everyone would know that Daddy's gone again. A home where Daddy is gone. Minho, watching her in the rearview mirror, noticed the change. He saw her shoulders slump slightly, her fingers fiddling with her medal ribbon. He wasn't an expert on children's emotions, but he recognized that quiet, post-holiday sadness. It was a sense of loss, even if it was only temporary. When the car stopped at a traffic light, he said quietly, without turning around, "All concerts end someday." His voice sounded unexpected in the silence, but not harsh. Amy looked up at him through the mirror. "But good music is remembered," he finished, meeting her gaze in the reflection. "And the feelings it gave you, they remain." He didn't say everything would be okay or that it could be repeated. He was stating a fact, but in that fact, there was a small consolation. Yes, the magic was over, but it had been there. It couldn't be taken away. The medal in the box was proof of that, and the feeling of pride as she ran with him to the finish line, and the looks of her classmates, full of respect, not pity. It remained. Ami nodded silently, clutching the box to her chest. The sadness hadn't gone away, but it had acquired an important note, gratitude for what she had experienced. He drove them all the way to the house, to the entrance. He got out to open the door for Kayla. The night was already completely dark, and the dim light was on in the entrance. Amy, exhausted from the emotions, had already slumped, leaning against her mother. "Well, Commander," Minho addressed Amy, using a light, almost joking tone that hadn't been there all day. "Is the mission complete?" Amy smiled faintly and nodded. "Done." "Excellent. Hold the line," he said with the same businesslike seriousness with which he had concluded the agreement in the park. And it made Amy smile a little wider. Then he turned to Kayla. His face was neutral and polite again. She searched his eyes for something. A hint, a question, a request, but found nothing but the same calm finality. "Thank you," Kayla said, the words coming out naturally, quiet but filled with genuine emotion. All her doubts and fears seemed petty now. You did more for her today than I could have ever expected. So much more. She didn't know how to express it more clearly. He gave her more than just presence. He gave her dignity, the disappearance of shame, pure, unconditional, childlike joy. Minho listened, his head bowed slightly. He didn't make excuses, didn't say "you're welcome," or downplay his contribution. He accepted the gratitude as fact. "It was an honor," he replied simply and sincerely. In his world, honor was a weighty word, not just a matter of empty politeness. It was used to mark truly important agreements or displays of respect. With this word, he drew a line. He did what he considered necessary and appreciated the result. He nodded goodbye, first to Kayla, then to Amy. Then he turned and walked toward his car, his dark figure disappearing into the shadows. The car door closed with a soft click. The headlights illuminated the yard, and he drove away. 2 days later, life seemed to have returned to normal. The medal took pride of place on the shelf in Amy's room. Memories of the holiday were sweet, but a little elusive. Kayla, returning from work, was preparing dinner when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She wiped her hands and answered. Hello, Kayla. Hello, this is Layla, came the familiar warm voice of the homeroom teacher. Oh, Layla, hello. Kayla was wary, mentally going over what could have happened at school. I won't be long. I just wanted to say again what a wonderful husband you have. The teacher laughed. He simply captivated everyone at the party. So composed, so well-mannered, so sensitive with our daughter. And it's clear that Amy adores him. Kayla felt a shiver run down her spine. She muttered something hesitantly like, Thank you. And actually, to the point, Layla continued, we have a scheduled parent-teacher meeting in a week. It's very important. We're discussing the year's program and preparations for some city events. We'd really like both parents to attend, especially the father. With his approach, with his understanding of discipline, his opinion would be very valuable to the parents' committee. You'll definitely persuade him to come, right? The phone almost fell out of Kayla's hands. She stood leaning against the wall, feeling the floor shift beneath her. Parent-teacher conference? Talk him down? Was his opinion valuable? I'm not sure, Layla, she finally managed. He's a very busy man. His schedule. Oh, I understand. A busy man, the teacher retorted enthusiastically. But it's so important for creating a healthy atmosphere in the classroom when both parents are involved. He made such an impression. Everyone is absolutely delighted. Please convey our request to him. We'll be waiting. After a few more pleasantries, the teacher hung up. Kayla slowly lowered the phone. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the wall, and the only thought pounding in her head was, what do I do now? The illusion they'd so painstakingly created for one day refused to dissolve. It demanded more, and Kayla was completely, utterly at a loss. She couldn't just call this mysterious Minho and say, sorry, you were so impressed that they're asking you to come to a parent-teacher conference. The polite, reserved world he'd briefly entered and from which he'd just as politely exited was once again making itself felt. And now she had to decide what to do next. Kayla spent 2 days in agonizing thought. Minho's business card lay on the table like an unexploded bomb. Asking him for an even bigger favor seemed the height of impudence, but explaining to the teacher that Daddy had disappeared was also impossible. It would have exposed Amy to more humiliating questions. Ultimately, her decision was dictated by the same maternal logic as in the park. Her daughter's well-being was more important than her own embarrassment. She dialed the number late at night when Amy was already asleep. The phone was answered almost immediately, but there was no usual hello. The silence in response was as thick and expectant as his presence. This is Kayla, she managed to say. Amy's mom? Yes. Minho's voice was even, without surprise. He seemed always prepared for any development. I'm so sorry to bother you, she began, faltering. But the teacher called us. After the party. She asks you to come to the parent-teacher meeting. She says you made an impression, and your opinion is important. She fell silent, expecting a polite but firm refusal. There was a pause on the line. Not a short one, but a long one, filled with quiet contemplation. Kayla felt like she could hear his mind working, weighing the pros and cons. Okay, he finally said, and it sounded like a businesslike agreement to a new contract term. Kayla almost dropped her phone. I'm sorry? I'll come to the meeting, he repeated clearly. But then there's a logical problem. If I'm a father who only shows up for official school events, that raises questions. Then they'll ask for more. For the morning party, for the community service. He spoke as if analyzing a weak point in the defense. To make it completely believable, we need to create a backdrop so that our appearance together doesn't seem like a one-off event. He paused again, letting her understand. That is, Kayla began hesitantly. So, to be more convincing, we need to see each other outside of school sometimes, he concluded simply, in a neutral setting, so that those around us can form a natural picture. This will strengthen the cover story and avoid unnecessary questions in the future. He offered this not as a request, but as a strategic solution. There was no hint of personal interest in his tone, only cold pragmatism. It was simultaneously frightening and relieving. He wasn't invading their lives. He was proposing to expand the boundaries of the myth for its own preservation. I don't know what to say, Kayla whispered. You don't need to say anything, he replied. You need to decide if you're ready for that level of coordination. If so, I'm free next Saturday. We can go to the zoo. It's neutral territory. Of Amy with the medal around her neck appeared before her again. Okay. She gave in, just as she had given in at the door. Saturday. The zoo. On Saturday, he arrived again, exactly on time. This time, he was dressed even more casually. Dark jeans, a sweater, and a windbreaker. He looked almost like a normal person, if not for that indispensable aura of composure. Amy warned that Daddy wants to get to know her interests better, was over the moon. The zoo was full of families. They merged into the flow, and from the outside, it again looked perfectly natural. Mother, father, daughter. Minho didn't try to play the enthusiastic parent. He walked alongside them, his gaze attentive but distant, like someone assessing the surroundings. Amy dragged him to each enclosure, and he listened to her enthusiastic comments about the elephants, giraffes, and monkeys, only occasionally asking a clarifying question. Why is the flamingo that color? Or, do you think it's cold? Near the bird pavilion, he bought Amy an ice cream, just one. Without asking, without offering Kayla any, as if it were part of a father-daughter ritual. Amy, happily, licked the cone, continuing to tell him incessantly about her science lesson. And he listened, without interrupting, without checking his phone. He simply listened, nodding occasionally. Kayla, walking slightly behind, watched them, and she was surprised to find that for the first time in a long, long time, her shoulders weren't tense with anticipation of a scandal. Her mind wasn't racing with excuses or defenses. There was nothing to worry about. He was paying the entrance fee. He was deciding where to go next, gently guiding Amy's choices. He was making sure she didn't get lost in the crowd. There was nothing suffocating in his calm, confident control of the situation, only reliability. She could simply walk, look at the animals, feel the autumn sun on her face, and think of nothing but this strange, peaceful moment. It was unusual and pleasant. That's how it started. First, as a strategic necessity. Then, as an unspoken rule. Once a week, sometimes every other week, Minho showed up. He never called at the last minute and never canceled. He'd just send a short message, tomorrow at 11, park/cinema, cafe. He never asked if it was convenient, but he always chose places Amy might like. The encounters varied. Sometimes they'd go to the movies to watch a cartoon, and Minho would sit motionless and silent in the dark, while Amy giggled nearby. Sometimes they'd go to a pastry shop, where he'd order dessert and tea for Amy, and black coffee for himself, sipping it while she chatted about school. He'd take them to the planetarium and the science museum, places Kayla herself wouldn't have chosen due to cost or time constraints, and always, always he was the same. Polite, reserved, and attentive listener. He never talked about himself, not about work, not about the past, not about his thoughts. He was like a blank slate on which only Amy and, gradually, Kayla wrote their stories. He asked precise questions that forced them to talk more, to open up. About Amy. What was the most difficult thing this week? What would you do if you were this character? About Kayla, cautiously. Are you working on a new project? Is this exhibition worth visiting? Having once learned in passing that she loves painting, it became a habit. Unusual, but strong. Ami began to look forward to these meetings, like anchors of stability in her life. Kayla! Kayla stopped cringing inwardly every time he appeared. She began to get used to his silent but palpable support, to the fact that in his presence there was no need to be on guard, that he was a part of their lives, albeit the strangest, most mysterious part. The line between performance and reality began to blur slowly, almost imperceptibly. They stopped pretending to be a family for those around them. They simply became one, in these short, regular intervals. And this rhythm, this strange, silent agreement, became a new, inexplicable, but very strong norm for them. The meetings had settled into a rhythm, almost becoming routine. One Saturday, they emerged from a small bookstore where Amy had chosen a new picture book. The autumn air was crisp and clear. Amy, clutching the book bag, was animatedly telling Minho something, while Kayla, smiling, walked slightly behind. In that moment of ordinary, peaceful happiness, the past materialized from around the corner. He emerged from the doors of the nearby grocery store. Ami's real father. He held a plastic bag in his hands, his face set in the perpetual scowl of dissatisfaction that had become second nature. His gaze slid along the sidewalk, caught Kayla, then moved to Amy, and then froze on Minho. His eyes narrowed, his lips twisted into a familiar, sardonic grin. He didn't go around them. He stopped right in their path, blocking the sidewalk with his body. Amy stopped mid-sentence and instinctively pressed herself against Minho's leg, hiding half her face behind it. "Well, hello," he drawled, his voice sounding falsely sweet, poisonous. "What an idyllic picture! A family outing!" Kayla felt everything inside her tighten into an icy lump. An old, familiar fear, mixed with disgust, rose in her throat. "Step aside," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to go." "We," he mimicked, his gaze flicking back to Minho, studying him from head to toe, taking in his expensive yet understated clothes, his relaxed posture. "Quick, I see you found a replacement. And with an oriental flair. Fashionable." His words were aimed at Kayla, but the blow struck all three of them. Amy, who cowered even further, their fragile, painstakingly built world. He savored the moment, watching his ex-wife's face turn pale. Kayla opened her mouth to find a caustic retort, to shout, to do something, but the words stuck. In that moment of paralyzing shame and anger, the simplest and most incredible thing happened. Minho moved. Not abruptly, not aggressively. He simply took one calm, measured step forward. One step, and he was right between Kayla and her ex-husband, not completely blocking Amy, but occupying all the space left for a possible confrontation. He didn't assume a fighting stance, didn't ball his fists. He simply stood. His arms hung loosely at his sides. He said nothing. No threat, no warning. He simply raised his eyes and looked at the man. That same gaze, calm, absolutely direct, unblinking. A gaze that held neither malice nor challenge. Only complete, bottomless silence and an unshakable confidence in his right to stand here. That gaze seemed to measure the insignificance, the petty, poisonous essence of the man before him, and find him unworthy of even a word. The ex-husband froze. His mocking grin faded, replaced first by bewilderment, then by a vague, animalistic wariness. He was used to Kayla's outbursts, her tears, her verbal altercations. He was prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for this stone, silent wall, for a gaze that seemed to see right through him and find nothing worthy of attention. In the silence that hung between them, he suddenly heard a car honking in the distance, the wind rustling dry leaves. The man muttered something. Unintelligible, incoherent. Not an insult, more like a fragment of a phrase that had lost its power. His eyes shifted. He took a step back, then another, as if stumbling over his own confusion. He cast one last glance, not at Kayla, but at Minho. Filled with a rage and fear he couldn't understand, turned and strode away, almost shuffling, trying to salvage the last vestiges of dignity that no longer existed. Minho watched him until he turned the corner. Then, slowly, just as calmly, he turned back. His face showed neither triumph nor relief. It was the same as always. "Let's go," he said simply, as if he'd just swatted away a pesky fly, and took Amy's hand again. His fingers were dry and warm. Amy, still pale, squeezed them tightly. That evening, after Amy, who had experienced both the joy of the new book and the shock of the meeting, had finally fallen asleep, Kayla and Minho remained in the kitchen. She poured tea into 2 simple mugs. The silence wasn't awkward, but rather rich, full of the unspoken. It seemed like everything had changed after today. He wasn't just playing a role. He stood up for them, for real, unasked, unconditionally, simply because he could. Kayla looked at his hands, wrapped around the hot mug. Strong, calm hands, the kind that could so easily carry her daughter on his back and stop aggression with the same silent force. "Why?" she finally blurted out, her voice hoarse in the quiet kitchen. "Why are you doing this? All of this? The walks, the meeting, today? You don't have to. You've already done more than anyone." Minho didn't answer right away. He stared at the dark surface of his mug, as if searching for answers. His face, usually so impassive, looked tired for a moment, not physically, but with a different, deeper weariness. "Once," he began very quietly, so quietly that Kayla barely heard him. "A long time ago, I had a family. I thought I could protect them with strength, with money, with authority. He paused, and a shadow of something irretrievably lost flickered in his eyes. I was wrong. Strength was not where I thought, and when real trouble came, I had no way to protect them. I was too late. He took a sip of tea, and the simple gesture seemed to wipe the shadow from his face, restoring his usual restraint. Now, he continued, looking not into the cup, but straight at her. And there was a piercing, disarming clarity in his gaze. Now I see your family. It's small, it's cracked, but it's alive. It wants to be whole. And I have an opportunity, a small, strange opportunity, to help protect her. At least a little. From the hurt, from the fear, from the feeling that she's not like everyone else. He wasn't talking about heroism or nobility. He was talking about opportunity. About the chance to right an old, deep-seated wrong by helping them. There was no sentimentality in his words, only cold, hard-won truth. Kayla listened, a lump in her throat, making it hard to breathe. She suddenly realized that all this time, his strange determination in the park, his flawless performance, his quiet, constant presence, it hadn't been an act. It had been redemption, a strange, personal, boundlessly generous redemption from the ghosts of his past. They weren't a family. They never would be in the usual sense. But in that quiet kitchen, over the steam of 2 simple mugs, something new was born. Fragile, like first ice, but incredibly strong in its silent agreement. This wasn't family, it was something more. A union, trust, a quiet protection, accepted and offered without further ado. And in that silence, full of understanding and naked truth, there was more warmth and humanity than in many loud confessions. They simply sat, drank tea, and that was enough. More than enough. This was the beginning of something real.